Pat Condell. I have to applaud your video commentaries on the three major religions of the God of the desert. You are correctly concerned about the threat to Western civilization of radical Islam combined with our modern political correctness attitude. You also have a deep respect for reason and a certain gift for ridicule. It is precisely because you have a respect for reason that I've decided to make this reply to your God the Psycho video diatribe. Now, you have some advantage as an atheist. You have no creed, except of course that you believe there is no God. You never really tell us what type of atheist you are. There are several types of atheists. There are the collectivist type atheists. This includes those followers of Karl Marx. They think religion was invented by the powerful to keep the masses occupied, so the powerful could steal a bigger slice of the finite pie. They also believe in a Hegelian progression of history that would end in a proletariat utopia where the pie would be infinite, from each according to his ability, to each according to his need, and all that. You know, that was their motto. Never mind that their concept of the pie is both finite and infinite. That little bit of self-contradiction never occurred to them. Pity nobody pointed it out. It would have made the 20th century a much nicer place to live. Then there are the individualist atheists. This would especially include followers of Ayn Rand. They struggle looking for moral absolutes derived from an empirical epistemology. It is an admirable goal, but their success is as likely as a Marxist's finding a pie that is both infinite and finite. Between these two ends of the atheist spectrum, there are likely many shades. You never quite tell us where you're coming from, but my guess is you're towards the individualist camp. Well, Pat, just as with atheists, there are many types of Christians. There are Eastern Orthodox, Coptic, Roman Catholic, and Protestant, just to name a few. I'm not going to attempt to defend every action in church history done in the name of Christ. For example, I will not defend the Crusades. Likewise, I wouldn't expect you to defend every action done in the name of atheism. Stalin's Gulag and Pol Pot's killing fields being two such examples. Worldviews are something like geometry we learned about in school. You remember, they started with presuppositions called axioms. 2 points determine a line and all that sort of thing. And then they progressed on to theorems like the Pythagorean theorem and many others. Well, every worldview starts out with presuppositions. From that point, it progresses on to ideas about morality, government, science, and all sorts of things. The thing that frustrates me about your video diatribes is you give us little information about your presuppositions. You do, however, give us an idea about your morality. You are moral. You believe that all people are equal and deserving fair treatment. You believe in freedom of speech and other liberties in the tradition of Western civilization. Let me identify my presuppositions. Sola Scriptura, sola fide, sola gratia, sola Christus, and sola Deo Gloria. These presuppositions have been in Christianity to some degree since the 1st century. They really were crystallized during the Reformation that followed Martin Luther's famous 95 Theses in 1517. However, men like John Wycliffe and John Huss were championing these ideas some 150 years before Luther. These ideas gave rise to a better understanding of the gospel, sometimes called the doctrines of grace. It is this fruit of the Protestant Reformation that has made the ideas of equality and liberty possible. My chief complaint to you is that you as an atheist assume and appropriate most of the results of my worldview, all the while denigrating where these ideas have come from. Let's take science as an example. Before the monotheistic God of Christianity, men had many gods, all these little local gods as you call them. Now with a monotheistic God as part of his worldview, Galileo expects the universe to make sense. He expects it to have been designed by God. When he sees a moon orbiting Jupiter, he jumps to the conclusion that it is the same forces at work that cause these moons to orbit Jupiter that causes our moon to orbit the Earth. That conclusion would not be rational given a pagan worldview. How do we know that Jupiter is not governed by a local god altogether different from our local God? For a Christian, it is natural to assume that the physical laws transcend the entire universe. This assumption is unfounded for the pagan. Galileo is well known for the trouble he had with the Roman Church. Johannes Kepler, the German mathematician, famous for describing all orbits as conic sections, said, "O God, I am thinking thy thoughts after thee," as he was studying astronomy. Both Kepler and Galileo expected the universe to make sense. They expected there was a rational explanation to the motions of the planets they observed. They believed that the living, transcendent God designed the universe. Kepler, of course, also had the advantage of living in a country that embraced the Reformation. Perhaps there is no greater area of Western civilization affected by the effects of the Reformation than the relationship of the individual to his government. Prior to Jesus, the idea of a servant leader was unknown in Western thought. There were no such things as public servants in Greece and Rome. Today, in both the US and the UK, we enjoy the effects of John Locke's ideas on government. The US Declaration of Independence states, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed." Thomas Jefferson wrote those words, and the Continental Congress ratified them, but they were ideas grown out of the effects of the Reformation. John Locke observed that the Bible had only one creation account, one Adam and one Eve, created in God's image. He observed that there was no second race created to be aristocrats. There was not an aristocrat Adam and a common Adam, just one Adam. It follows then that all men were created equal. In 1644, the Puritan preacher and scholar Samuel Rutherford published Lex Rex. Rutherford argued against the ideas espoused by Charles I and his ilk. Ideas such as the divine right of kings and the notion that the king was above the law. Rutherford showed that although the Old Testament David had been pronounced king by God's prophet Samuel, David continued to respect Saul as king of Israel, and in fact, David did not function as king until he had entered into covenants with the people. To Rutherford and to Locke, this sounded like deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. In the 1600s, the Puritans were very busy reforming government. They're expanding the application of the rights in the Magna Carta of 1215 to include the common man. You know, in the USA here, we have the Fifth Amendment to our Constitution. It prohibits the government from compelling you to give evidence against yourself. In earlier times, you could actually be tortured to give evidence against yourself. I don't know about you, Pat, but I really appreciate the right not to be tortured by a government who wants evidence. I realize it makes the jobs of the police and prosecutors more difficult, but I appreciate that right nonetheless. Don't you?